Hello and welcome to our lab using data mesh to connect data between traditional and microservices applications. Welcome. I see we are quite a lot this morning. My name is Jan Leemans. I will be your host for the day, but I'm not alone. We have quite a nice crew lined up. Let me introduce you to the crew. We have Sydney and Ewan, who will be running through the labs together with you, showcasing the various steps. We have Ettore, who is managing the Zoom and helping you out with the trials if necessary. We have Daria, who will be managing the breakout rooms. And then we have a support crew, and of course, Thomas, who will be co-presenting with me the introduction of this event. So what's on the agenda exactly? So we will start with a short introduction of the data mesh by Thomas. Then I'll explain very briefly the various lab steps, the overview of what we are going to do in terms of practical activity today. And then we will go into a loop whereby we briefly explain you each individual lab step, around 5 minutes, walking you through the various steps. And then we give you 10 minutes of time to actually execute those steps. Around 10 minutes, it will vary a little bit depending on the step that we will be taking. And during that time, we will be setting up breakout rooms that allow you to get support from our support crew. So you will be able to go into a one-on-one session with somebody from Oracle to get help if you run into problems. We'll repeat that around 4 times, I think, in total. And then we will close this event around 12:30 CET. That's in about 2 hours. So with that, let's get started with the actual content, right? So let's start with the introduction of what is a data mesh. Thomas, over to you.
Thank you, Jan, and welcome from my side. My name is Tomáš Vávra. I am part of the product management for GoldenGate. And next 10-15 minutes, I'm going to guide you as an intro to the topic of data fabric, data mesh in context of our product, mainly GoldenGate platform. So let's get started. Data fabric, data mesh are getting very exciting hot topics right now. So data mesh is some emerging hot topic for enterprise software that giving focus of new ways of thinking about the data. Data mesh is the goal of the data mesh is to improve business result of data-centric solution, as well as to drive adoption of modern data architecture. Gartner recently published very nice expectation of the trends, which is going to be hot topic in 2022. And not a surprise, trend number 1 is data fabric or data mesh. And Gartner also expect that distributed enterprise is another trend and the essential for the aspect for digital transformation initiatives in enterprise for enterprise companies. We as Oracle start to talk about data fabric and data mesh around 6 years ago from the start. We have been recognized by Forrester in their Forrester Wave report as a leader for data fabric first in 2015. And we are working with the customers on distributed data mesh architecture since 2019. So we also published a lot of materials around this topic, ebook, deep technology paper, where we are in deep describe our view to this trend in the context of our portfolio. And if you are looking for the additional information, I definitely suggest to find our YouTube channel, where we have recorded a couple of webinars, which is in 50 minutes, 30 minutes, and 1 hour, going deeply to this topic. And try to find a way how to introduce the trends to you. Yep. So, okay, what is the data mesh? How we can define the data mesh? From business point of view, data mesh introduced due to new ideas around the data product thinking, and how it can help to drive a more cross-functional approach to business domain modeling and creating high-value data product. From the technology side, there are three important pillars, which is going to focus to area for data-driven architecture. The first is distribute, decentralized data architecture that help organization move away from the monolithic architecture. So it's the same trends as we saw in AppDev, let's say, spectrum. Secondly, it's event-driven data ledgers for enterprise data in motion. And it's streaming-centric pipelines to replace a legacy batch type of approach, handle real-time events, and provide more timely analysis. From the Oracle perspective, definitely we agree with this this switch, and we see data mesh as or data fabric as a new concept for the data. Definitely, it's a core culture mindset shift to put the needs of the data consumers first. I think the data mesh is focusing to shift towards highly distributed and real-time data events as opposite to monolithic, decentralized, and maybe batch-style data processing. There is the four important attributes or pillars of data mesh. The first, as I mentioned, is to change thinking about the data, to take the data as a product, the data product thinking. And this is the mandatory attributes for the data mesh concept, and let's say commitment to manage data as a product. Data product maybe as a part of kind of data architecture, but thinking of data as a product is a crucial part of all data mesh architecture, because it's put the data consumers at the heart of the design. Another part of the attribute is decentralized data architecture or a distributed data mesh topology, which is the way how to distribute across the networks between on-prem, multi-cloud, or use the cloud as customer approach, etc., etc. So event-driven data ledgers are the third key attributes of data mesh. So ledgers or logs are the fundamental components of making a distributed data architecture function. And the data mesh is not just one single kind of the ledger. It can make us of different type of event-driven data ledgers depending of the use cases and the requirements. And finally, we are speaking about the polyglot data streaming, which is the real-time processing for all data types. This is the intro, so it's not easy to introduce the whole concept in 15 minutes. So therefore, if you are interested in more details, I suggest to download the ebook, where we are going to deeper details and also introduce the 7 data mesh use cases together with the customer examples. And you can, let's say, see how we can position in our product and see the example in concrete implementation, which we have it. Okay, so what is the foundation of the data mesh or data fabric strategy? I would like to, in the rest of the time, briefly introduce the cornerstone, which is the GoldenGate. GoldenGate is the most trusted solution for data integration last 2 decades. It's been the startup in the end of the 90s and long time working around the data and data real-time integration. We have more than 1,000 of customers in more than 180 countries. Also, GoldenGate has been recognized as a award-winning technology, continuously rated leader for real-time data, and recognized as a solution for data fabric and data mesh capabilities. If you are using, you are probably using GoldenGate every day. If you something buy today or use the credit card or logged into some work application, you've probably used GoldenGate without even knowing it. So if we take a look to the use cases where is fitting for the GoldenGate, definitely it's around the real-time data transactions areas. If you go to data events, it's use cases for high availability, disaster recovery places, transactional application between OLTP databases, classic change data capture for Oracle and non-Oracle databases. We also supported the data pipelines, real-time data ingest, streaming integration, and continuous data transformation and loading. Part of the GoldenGate platform is the streaming analytics, which is very nicely coexist together with GoldenGate, and we are able to analyze data streams, time series analysis, machine learning, geospatial, etc., etc. And also GoldenGate platform is the part of the governance strategy for the data verification, metadata catalog, and enterprise grade security as a part of MA architecture. What is the one of the big advantage of GoldenGate is the heterogeneity. We are have more than 100 combination of integration patterns between the relation, non-relation platforms, databases. We have a support directly couple of Oracle applications, and in real time with low latency, moving the events into the relation databases, cloud, different cloud technologies or cloud environments. In case of topology, big data environments, NoSQL, or the streams architecture. Okay, from the data mesh or data fabric point of view, Oracle has been reinvented a couple of years ago, and to fully support the microservice architecture inside. So based on this approach, it's suitable for large enterprises running in on-prem environment, in cloud environment, not only in Oracle Cloud, but in the other clouds. And with this support, easily is implemented part of the data mesh strategy. Or you can use the classic approach with hub and spoke architecture for the real-time data integration use cases. So it's a very brief introduction of GoldenGate. There is a lot of more what we didn't have a time to go. I expect that we are not first time to see the GoldenGate because this is the hands-on lab, so I expect that you have some basic of knowledge. But again, I would like to motivate it, or I would like to suggest to you to find another topics which I mentioned, like the ebook, the tech paper around the data mesh strategy and how we as an Oracle see it, and deep in dive these problematics. So finally, I hope that this hands-on lab represent, as a, let's say, the first way how to start to work with or to start the long path on the data mesh strategy. And if you needed more detailed information, feel free to ask us. We are ready to present in 15-30 minutes or in the longer, or also discuss in concrete use cases. So that's all from my side, and hand over back to Jan.
Okay, thank you a lot. Thanks a lot, Thomas, for that introduction. Let me take back the screen from you. There we go. So you should see my screen now. So that was the theoretical introduction. What is a data mesh, a data fabric, and what are the components that Oracle brings to the table there? Let's now move over to the more practical part. Let's get our hands dirty and play around with these concepts, and especially this GoldenGate product, so that you get a feel of what it means to configure flows in that environment. So today we will not do a full-fledged data mesh setup. We have isolated one specific use case, and we're actually working on a follow-up lab on this, where we go to the next level to add more functionality to this use case. But basically what we're trying to showcase here is that GoldenGate allows us to implement the principles of a data mesh. One of those principles is domain ownership of data and publication of data as a product. It's one of the key definitions of a data mesh itself. So what we are going to do is we're going to take what we would consider a classic application written in whatever language you can imagine, typically Java, using a classic relational database schema. And we're considering that this is kind of like a black box from our perspective. We don't want to interfere with that application. So we are going to use GoldenGate to extract on the low-level database, very non-intrusive, the data changes of that application, and push that into our domain local data warehouse system, where we can do some processing and then expose that information to other groups within our organization. And for that, we will use the Oracle REST data services of the database, ORDS, which is a very simple way to expose JSON file type of information that is stored in your data warehouse. There's much more that is possible. There's a more complicated version of this lab, which we will skip, where we could actually, within GoldenGate itself, actively call out to specific microservices, typically within the domain, because otherwise the coupling would be too strong. But here in this lab, we'll simply have then a microservice, which will be a simple Ruby application that will consult that ORDS URL and extract the data from the application and store it in a JSON file again in its own data environment. And then again, we might do extra processing, add some event-based stuff around it in a next step. So that's what we're going to do. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use our cloud environments. So the very first step of this lab is actually to get a trial. Normally, you did receive an email asking you to do that upfront. So I hope that most of you were able to do that. And I think Ettore has a little poll ready to check out where we are, so that we have a feel of how many people actually got the trial okay. Let me see what's happening. It's going up like... Yeah, I'm looking at results live. I see that quite some people do not yet have a trial. So don't worry. please go to this URL that is listed here below. It's a bit.ly URL that will redirect you to the Oracle trial environment, trial request screen. Now, very important, please do use the same email address that you used to subscribe to this event to register for that account, because we whitelisted all those email addresses, and that means you get to be fast tracked. You don't have to do all the verification steps, and most importantly, you don't have to provide credit card details. So you can just, with your account, go in. The registration process will be much shorter, and in a few minutes you will have your free trial account. In case you have issues obtaining that trial, I will explain, after I've explained the actual lab steps, I will explain our help mechanism, the breakout rooms, and you can request assistance. We have Ettore, who is able to help you out, to get you maybe a new trial on an alternate address if you are encountering some problems. So, but without further ado, let's go to the next steps of the lab. So part one, hopefully you already have the trial. If not, please go to that link and fill in the details. If not, then we continue. The first real part of the lab is creating some infrastructure components. We'll set up two databases, one source database and one target database, and we'll set up the GoldenGate instance. We'll use the autonomous flavors of the database, but basically GoldenGate allows to do that with, as Thomas explained, with basically any type of database, Oracle or non-Oracle. And then we'll set up the actual GoldenGate instance itself on OCI, where we will then configure in the next steps the data integration points. But first, in part 3 of the lab, we will create the schemas necessary to simulate these environments. We'll have a schema representing the classic relational database with the customer and policies and stuff like that. And we'll have the data warehouse where we pump over that information and where we will do some processing and expose it as an ORDS schema towards the outside world. In this case, it's really the outside world. It's a public URL that we will be creating. In reality, you might actually, of course, put security on top of that URL so that only internal people can see it. That's outside of the scope of this lab, obviously, to set up that level of detail. And then in part 4, we will actually set up the actual flows of GoldenGate. We'll go into the GoldenGate user interface. We'll set up the extract mechanism. We'll set up the Replicat to push data to that other database. And basically, we'll make sure that all these processes are up and running and ready to capture data. And then that's what we're going to do in the last part. In step 5, we're going to actually activate a script, a little SQL script that will simulate our classical application, and we'll start injecting hundreds and hundreds of records into this database, and we'll follow what is happening, what GoldenGate is actually doing. We'll look at the count of what is happening here, the count of what is happening here, and we'll look at the results flowing out of that application, actually seeing the converted data, the data product that's published by this domain, flowing into this microservice. That's it. So the free trial is the first step. Now, these 5 steps is the actual lab tutorial, and that is this link. And I think if all is well, you should find those links now also in the chat of this session itself. So you can just click on them. You don't have to type them over. This will guide you to a page that will be the start of the lab. Once you're in there, you can navigate from step to step, from part 1 to part 2, etc. It's pretty self-explanatory. And of course, we will go for each step. We have Ewan and Sydney actually guiding you to the details, through the details of each of those steps. But I hope with this, you have the overview of where we are going with this lab. So with that, I think it's time to get going, right? Let's move to the actual lab steps. And I think Ewan, if all is well, is ready to walk you through step 1 and step 2 of the lab. Ewan, are
Yep.
you ready?
I am indeed. Okay. So, presumably you can see my screen, Jan, if you can just confirm.
All good.
Yep. Okay. So, if you go to navigate to the link that Jan showed, you'll see the diagram of what we're doing in the overall lab. The first thing that you need is to make sure that you can access the Oracle Cloud environment. So if you haven't got your trial account or you haven't got access to a paid tenancy, that's going to be the first thing that you're going to need to do. The second thing that you need to do is you go and you get a set of files that we're going to use for the lab, and you can just download them to your machine, and then you can go and unzip them depending on however your particular operating system works. We're going to be using these files. They contain some of the SQL scripts that we'll be using to build the database and the database schema, and they also contain the code for the consumer microservice. Then this one is not a thing that you have to do, but it's actually incredibly useful. You're going to need to keep track of some IP addresses, host names, passwords. So the easiest thing to do is to open your editor of choice and just cut and paste those elements into there. Finally, oh yeah, and yeah, don't try doing it in Word because it will misinterpret or may misinterpret some things that we don't actually mean as grammar characters. This probably isn't going to affect anybody, but if you're on a paid tenancy, you'll need to make sure that you're able to create a VCN and 2 autonomous databases and a GoldenGate instance. Yeah, as I say, that's probably not going to be an issue for anyone. Then once we've got the prerequisites, we can actually go into creating the infrastructure components, which is this part of the lab. So what we're going to need is we're going to need something called a VCN or a virtual cloud network. And we're going to need 2 database instances and a GoldenGate deployment. So these instructions walk you through how to create your VCN and subnet. Now, when you first log into your tenancy, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, you'll see a screen like this. If you go and click the hamburger up here, that will show you all the different kind of services that are available. So the VCN, you'll find that under networking. If you go and click virtual cloud networks, everything you create in OCI, you create in a thing called a compartment. So to create the VCN, you go to a particular compartment and you'll click create VCN. Actually, no, I don't want to do that. No, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to actually do that one, which is start the VCN wizard. Yeah, because that will make things really easy and stop you having to answer complicated questions. So we create the VCN, we create a subnet. As I said, use the start VCN wizard. It'll ask you to enter some data for the VCN. The name doesn't really matter. The compartment, you need to get it right. Then you're going to create 2 what we call ATP, Autonomous Transaction Processing Databases. So the first one, the source ATP, is like the database of the analytical system. The second one is going to be our data warehouse. So we're going to have our 2 autonomous databases. To create those, if you go to databases, you'll be able to create, Oracle database. You can then create your autonomous databases. So it's either transaction processing or data warehouse. There's also a thing we've got called JSON database for if you're doing a project where you just want your data in a JSON format. So you can go and create those. And then the final thing that we're going to create is something called a GoldenGate deployment. And again, if you're under the Oracle Databases tab, you can go to GoldenGate, and that will take you into creating the deployment. So if you work through those steps, you will then have your you'll have your virtual cloud network, you'll have your subnet within there, and within that environment, you will have deployed 2 autonomous databases, and you will then have your GoldenGate deployment, which we are going to be able to use to move data as the transactional or operational system is updated. As data flows into that, GoldenGate will be capturing it and moving it across to the downstream system, which is where we're going to create our data product, which will then be consumed by a microservice coming in from the outside world. So if you start working on your way through those bits of the lab, if you have any problems, as Jan said, use the chat, explain the issue that you've got. You'll be assigned to a breakout room and one of us will help you. And once you've done all the way through that, you've got about 10 minutes to do that. Then Sydney will go through the next part, which will be configuring the schemas and configuring the flows that will allow you to store the data and have it flow from one part to the other. And then I'll be back to talk about the consumer service afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Ewan. I think this is it. Now is the time for you to start working, and we will be here helping you with any issues that you might encounter. Let me share my screen. I think Ewan stopped sharing his. That's not what he was supposed to do. Okay, here we are. Time to execute a lab. So I think for this step of the lab, we actually assigned 15 minutes. So I have this timer. Let me get it up. I have this timer which moved around. That was not intended to happen. I will lock it in place and we'll start 15 minutes for you to work on these labs. Good luck running the lab. See you in 14 minutes and 30. Okay, so we are at the end of our timer. So hopefully you were able to take step 1 and step 2 by now. Okay, let's continue. I think now is the time for Sydney to explain us the setup of the database schemas. Sydney, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me and you can see my desktop.
Yep, all good.
Okay, perfect. So in the first lab, you know, when we had the initial setup, you did download some files. These lab files basically are in a zip. So I'm just going to cover, you know, the files that we're going to use in the next steps. The first one, after you unzip, that we're going to be concerned with is this DM lab. Okay, so the DM lab is basically the monolithical side of the equation for today's exercise. And the very first thing is we're going to actually create the user and set of schema objects. So if you're looking inside that script, you will notice that we are creating a user if you're not familiar with SQL. And that will be identified by a password. So if you are, you know, down the road wanting to connect as this user, this is where we're initializing that password. You may use a different or change that at the end of the day. We will continue through creating some schema objects for you, but I actually just want to highlight the last step of this script. And this is very pertinent for the GoldenGate configuration when we use it with autonomous database. So the GoldenGate product itself is actually a part of the Oracle database, and we are embedding parts of that capability within the database. So when it comes to using GoldenGate with Oracle, it's a much simpler process, okay? And to enable that and turn it on, basically for the autonomous database, we need to have this line where we're altering the pluggable database and starting to add supplementing logging. Basically, it's notifying the database that we want to start capturing specific transactions, and we'll kind of tell the database what those transactions are later on as we configure the flows. The second script that you will be running is the OSM3 schema script, not the version 2. So as Jan mentioned, we do have a different version of this lab, and we have expanded it out and changed it somewhat to simplify for today's exercise. But we will be looking at the OSM3 schema. So this is where we initialize our target schema, resources, and objects. Okay. So the very first thing that you're going to be doing is opening and copying the DevLab script. So basically, you're going to highlight all of those steps within that text file and copy it. All right. We're going to be using these steps in the autonomous database as a database developer. Okay. So to find your autonomous database, you have seen the steps from Ian, but just in case, you can either go to Oracle database or you can search for the name of your autonomous database if that screen is already closed. Okay. Please do not forget to select your compartment. Okay. So I'm going to go through the steps. The very first portion that we're going to be in is to configure the source. And we're going to swap over and configure the target. And then lastly, the steps are to configure and enable GoldenGate in each one of those steps, which is in Lab 3. And I'll kind of show you that in a little bit. And then we'll be configuring GoldenGate to capture or extract those changes and apply or replicate those to the target system. Okay, so the lab that we should be in is part 3, configuring the schemas. Okay, so again, I'm going to set up that monolithical schema, and you're going to be doing that on the source side, right? So going through, you should have 2 autonomous database connections. I only have 1, but basically you're going to connect to your instance, connect to the database tools, and run the script. So I'm going to connect to my instance, clicking the link, going to database actions to access the tools. You may also access it by going to tools. Oh, they changed the menu. Okay. That's a little bit changed. Okay. And then you're going to be logging in. I'm using the admin user. Bring in my password. And I'll come to the Launchpad. The very first part we're going to be using is the SQL Navigator. You can access that here through the hamburger menu, SQL, as well as the other menu items. Okay, so I'm going to go to SQL. And you will be running the script underneath the admin user. Okay, make sure I copy that script. Okay. And there's 2 buttons at the very top to run and execute steps. There's a single line to run a single statement or to execute the entire script. So make sure you run the entire script. I've already executed both scripts in my environment. Okay. And it will create, as I said, the user and all of the objects for that user. Okay. You can run the first script in your source and go through the similar steps to run the script in your target. Okay. Now, in the lab, it tells you to check that that user now exists. Okay, so OSM or OSM3, and to verify the table objects exist. If they do not show up, okay, there may be a refresh issue with your browser. Just log out of the admin client, sign back in, and that list should refresh and you should be able to find that user. Okay. Another way to verify, and as well in the following step, is to check the database users. Excuse me. And you will notice that your user, be it your OSM or OSM3 user, will be in your list of users. Okay. If for any reason you need to update, change, or if you've forgotten the password for that user, as you will be, enabling the GoldenGate admin user, you just simply edit the user and you can change that password, okay? For the GoldenGate admin user, we will be editing, enabling, and changing that user's password, okay? So make sure that you do that in both the source and target, okay? And switch back to the steps, okay? So setting up, making sure you go to the worksheet, okay? Confirming the output of the script, looking for that user. Again, if it's not there, log out, log back in. It should refresh that list. I know that I have this problem on Chrome on the MacBook. Maybe you won't have that issue, but if you do, please log out and back in. Verify that your source and or target schema exist. And the last step is to enable the GoldenGate admin user, so GG admin, in both your source and target databases, okay? The next set of steps is actually configuring the replication flow, okay? So if you're familiar with GoldenGate, basically we're going to be establishing a database connection within the GoldenGate environment, using those connections to configure and set up transaction data capture, basically saying to the database which objects, which schema objects we're interested in to get those changes from.
Sydney,
Then we'll...
Sydney, I need to interrupt you here because we will do this step in the next iteration. Let's
Okay.
give people some time to do the schema first, and then we'll come back to you for that second step.
Okay, perfect, Jan. Then I'll come back and go through that step.
Okay, so let me share my screen back. Time again to execute the steps, right? So we're giving you 10 minutes to do this database setup. Now, this is just our timing. We know that in reality, some people are faster, some people are slower. No worries, you continue at your own pace, but we will, at these regular timings, give you the next explanation. So you've seen now the explanation of part 3, setting up the database environments in 10 minutes. And let me start the timer now. We will come back, Sydney will come back and explain you that step 4 on how to set up the actual flows between those databases using GoldenGate. And now I have to shut up because you have to work for the next 9 and 45 minutes, 9 minutes and 45 seconds. See you after that. Okay, we are at the end of this working period. So let's pause the timer. So without over to you, Sydney, for explaining us what we are going to do in the 4th part of this lab.
There we go.
Here you are. Okay, cool. Over to you.
Okay, thanks. So in the previous step, we configured the schemas that we're going to be capturing from or extracting from, and where we're going to, apply those changes or replicate to. So in this step is actually where we're going to configure that flow. So hopefully you have OCI GoldenGate provision, you have a deployment, but if not, feel free, take your time. The lab environment steps are all available online, and they will be completely, free to use even after we're done with the workshop today. Okay, and you all have your own cloud tenants, so you'll be able to go through those steps at your leisure. Okay, so at a high level, you're going to go into your GoldenGate deployment console. You're going to log into your, you're going to register the database connections for the source ATP and then the target ATP instances by selecting the database configuration details and using the GG admin user that you enabled and provided a password in that previous step. Okay, so that's all in step 1. Okay, very well documented here. Again, if you need to find the GoldenGate screen, you have two options. Either you go to Oracle Database, GoldenGate, or simply use the search feature, and you'll notice that GoldenGate comes up, and you can go directly to register databases. Okay, and you'll register those two connections. What happens actually is those two connections are going to be registered to all of the deployments within this compartment. So these databases, these registered connection details are shared across all of your deployments within the compartment. So once you leave here today and you're going and you're playing around or using GoldenGate, if you see this behavior, this is to be expected, okay? Because they will automatically be sent to your deployment. So go through, select register, and then provide those details. Source ATP makes it easy to identify when you're in the GoldenGate console. If you've used a different compartment name, please make sure that you are in the correct compartment to find your databases. Select autonomous, provide the details. Again, using that ggAdmin, hopefully that is defaulted for you, and the password you supplied. Okay. If you have forgotten, remember you can always go back to the database actions and change or update the database user password through those screens. Okay. So don't forget, repeat this step for your target autonomous instance. Okay. So it's only showing it once for source, but we repeat the steps to register target ADW for name and alias. Okay, selecting target ADW. Again, same user, whatever password you used. Okay. Once that's done, we have the connections. We can go into GoldenGate, our GoldenGate deployment, logging in, launching the console. Okay, so if you're on register databases, you simply go up to deployments, and you'll see your deployment listed. Select your deployment, launch the console. Okay, you'll get prompted to log in, provide your ggAdmin, user details. Okay, and then we can go through and configure and start setting up actual replication. The very first thing is we're going to add transactional data, which are basically telling the database which objects we are interested in collecting the change records from. And on the target side, we want to set up a checkpoint table. So for those of you not familiar with GoldenGate, a checkpoint is another mechanism that we can recover from failures if something happens. So we know exactly what was the last change applied to the target database instance. We come back, we check and query the checkpoint table. We have our checkpointing system within GoldenGate. We can make a comparison of what was last read, what was actually last delivered into the target database, and restart the replication process. Okay, those are some fairly simple steps to do so. But once you're inside the console, you're on the administration server, you're going to use the menu to get to configuration. You'll notice that the connections are listed, and there's this little connect icon to connect to the database. So first connect to your source, go through the steps, then connect to your target and go through the steps. So on the source, again, we are going to add trans data, okay, adding for the OSM schema. And then on the target, we're going to add the checkpoint tables, okay. Please use quoted identifiers when you're adding the steps, okay. Okay, the screenshot doesn't show it. We have had some issues in the past, so we have always used quoted identifiers. All right. Once that's done, you'll notice that a checkpoint table does get listed here. with the name that you specified. And for the previous step, you'll notice how many objects we will be capturing changes from. The next set of steps are actually running through to configure the rest of the replication process. So the very first step is to create an extract, which is our capture side, reading the changes from our source. Fairly simple, okay? But we'll be going back to the admin menu to do that. So screenshot doesn't show it, but please go back to the overview using the menu to get to this screen, this home page, all right? And then there's going to be two sections on that page. The left side is dedicated to extracts, and the right side, not shown here, is dedicated to replicates. So when you're configuring your extract, you'll be using the left side with the plus sign. And when you do your replicate, you'll be using the right side with the plus sign, okay? The steps are fairly simple, okay? We're not doing a very complicated configuration for GoldenGate today, just making sure that we use the right credentials for either the source or the right credentials for the target, right? And then we have some simple configuration that we're going to add to the parameter file. So make sure highlight and copy and paste that. Okay, you may want to verify that copy and paste it into your notepad or text editor of choice, and then recopying it. Make sure you don't have any extra characters. Okay. And once you're done, you click create, and then afterwards, you'll click start. Now this, depending on how you configure it, integrated, will take a few seconds to register with the database, initialize the GoldenGate processes that are running inside the database before you actually see it going from yellow warning to green. Again, if you have some problems with the initialization or the configuration of either the extract or the replicate sides, feel free to, ping us in the chat, and we'll get you through, completing those steps. One thing that may be of interest is you are going to specify a trail name. This trail name here is what you will use when you set up the target. Okay, I'm not kind of covering what a trail file is today, but it is something that's used by GoldenGate to transfer transactional changes from the database in the database native format to a GoldenGate format that we can use across all of our heterogeneous sources and targets and all of our mixtures of deployment options. So be that OCI GoldenGate, where it's Oracle, or GoldenGate for big data, or so forth, we can use the same set of trail file configuration or storage mechanism to replicate or transfer those data changes from one system to the other, okay? Hopefully, when you go through the extract side, you'll be familiar enough with the user interface to go through and do the replicate side. So again, on the right side, use the plus sign on the right side, going through, putting in the target side credentials, selecting that checkpoint table, noticing it is using quoted identifiers. That's at the bottom of the screen. You should have a little pull down box to select that. And note the trail file should come up, right, from the local system. Okay, if it doesn't, just feel free to type those two characters in there. Next, create, and then start. Okay, and after that, the actual replication process is up and running and ready to propagate the changes from your source system, monolithical, to the target system. Okay, again, we are doing very, very simple replication today, but you can do additional steps within your configuration to do transformation on the fly, filtering on the fly, if you so choose to. All right, with that, Jan, I think you're ready to Take over.
Yes.
Let them
Okay. Thank you for that explanation, Sydney. We will give you 15 minutes now to execute these next steps, and for those who are a bit behind, to catch up. So hopefully you can see my screen now. Yes. And I will start the timer for 15 minutes. See you in 15. Okay. Welcome back to the last part of the lab. Ready for the last step? So let's move to this last part with Ewan. Ewan, over to you to explain us that last part.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Just a sec. So yeah, you should now have, you've got your transactional system, the operational system, you've got GoldenGate moving the data through to the analytical system where we've got our data product, which should have been set up as an ORDS endpoint, which will give you the customer demographic data. That's our data product. So what I'm going to talk about here is, or the last step is, looking at how we can consume that data product. For the purposes of this lab, we're going to use the Cloud Shell. So if you go into your OCI tenancy and you click that, that will create a little Cloud Shell environment. I wouldn't use this for anything in production. You should deploy a real service to a VM or a container. But this is just a convenient place for us to run something just now to consume that data product. So what we're going to do, and you can make the view of the Cloud Shell bigger, do that, is we're going to upload a file. And that will put that into the root directory of the Cloud Shell environment. Yours will be cleaner than mine. The file you'll have is this, consumer RB. And if you just have a look at that, it uses a gem called Faraday as the REST client. And what it basically does is you give it a URL. You can optionally specify an interval, and it's going to poll that data product. It's going to put that data into a file called demographics.json. And what it basically does is each time it polls round, it sees if it's found new customer records, and if it has, it writes them out to the file. So if you've got the URL for your endpoint, then you'll be able to run it. The other thing you need to do first is you need to install the Faraday gem. So run through that, that'll install the gem. And then if you run that, it'll go and it'll pull the records out. And if you've got records, records flowing from one of your databases to the other, you'll see that record count increase. The other way that you can do that, mimic that, is if you just change the number of items per page. If you do 0 on items per page, you actually get all of the items back. So you can do that, and then what you will see, the output will be that demographics JSON file. And that, of course, could then be taken, used in some other way, or put into some kind of database instead of just for a flat file. So all those steps are basically detailed here. You start by opening your Cloud Shell. You go to the hamburger menu, the file upload the file, install the gem, and then you take your ORDS URL and you do ruby consumer.rb. Okay. And the final thing is the load simulator. Yeah, so if you follow these steps through, you exec the transload, and what that will be doing is that will then be pushing the records into your database, and you will see the number of records increase as you run the file. So over to you guys.
Okay, thank you, Ewan. That was a bit faster than I expected, so let me take a few minutes to set up my screen again. Sharing my screen. Okay, so let me look at the timing. Let's give you guys 10 minutes to finish this last step or to catch up, and then we will close off the event with a few announcements around other events that are upcoming. So let me go back to the timer, reset it to 10 minutes, that is. And off we go. See you in 10. Okay, thank you for working on this lab so far. I think we reached the end of this event. We explained all the lab steps, and now I'm gonna hand over to Ettore for doing the closing. Ettore, over to you.
Yeah, hello everybody. I hope that you enjoy. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so thank you, Jan. Thank you, Ewan. Thank you, Sydney. Thanks to all the Oracle experts that were following you for the support. But first of all, thanks to you to join us today and let's say go ahead in this lab. I shared in chat a bit link for the feedback. Okay, so please, if you can share your feedback and comment, we appreciate, because we can tune, we can do the best setup also for next time. Last but not least, this is really about you, let's say, until the 31st of December. So you should get benefit because there is 1 month, okay? You can get a series of free Oracle Cloud Infrastructure certification. So I advise to join the portal and check. So it's really something that it's for yourself to groove your skills on Oracle and be certified for free. So the value is huge, in my opinion. So really, thank you to join for this hands-on lab today. Bye.